What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about a graphic novel today, specifically Volume 7 of John Byrne's run on the Fantastic Four in the Visionaries volumes. This collects an assortment of issues: Fantastic Four Annual 19 and Avengers Annual 14, Fantastic Four 285 through 286, Avengers Issue 263, and X-Factor Issue 1. This is probably some of the weakest of the Fantastic Four stuff that John Byrne has done so far, and I wasn't even a huge fan of Volume 1, and a lot of Volume 2 I didn't really like either. But this is worse than both of those volumes, and let me go ahead and explain why I feel that way. This book opens up with the two annuals, Fantastic Four Annual 19 and Avengers Annual 14. Sometime back, we had a crossover between the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. I want to say it was in Fantastic Four Visionaries Volume 4 or 5. I'm not sure which one. I think 4. We had a non-crossover, really is what it was, because the Fantastic Four were inside the Baxter Building, where this force field was emanating from the Baxter Building, and it was pushing everybody away from the building. And so you have the Avengers in the Avengers series. They are trying to deal with this crisis from their point of view, and then the Fantastic Four are trying to deal with it from within the force field. And I don't think the two groups even got to meet each other in this crossover, but it was a really novel idea. It was kind of a cool thing to see. It was a crossover where the heroes don't actually get to talk to each other that much, and I thought that was pretty neat. This book tries to sort of do the same thing, where the Fantastic Four and the Avengers are separately heading towards this space station where they are fighting the Skrulls, and this bomb is detonated that basically causes every Skrull in the universe to be stuck in whatever form they are in. There's this one Skrull who is shapeshifted as some inanimate object, and we get to see that now they are stuck as that inanimate object. And so I think this kind of had some ramifications throughout the Marvel Universe. I know in the late 80s there was a Silver Surfer solo series where they talked about this a little bit. So if you were ever curious where that got its start, it was in this crossover between these two annuals. And I thought this was an okay story, but it feels less like a Fantastic Four story, and it feels more like a Marvel Universe crossover. It doesn't really feel like it belongs in the Fantastic Four series. And then you get this one issue that is a tie-in to Secret Wars 2, that is Fantastic Four issue 285, and that is the one where some kid sets himself on fire trying to be like the Human Torch. And I imagine that John Byrne did this as a response to the urban legend that people were afraid that kids would set themselves on fire if they saw the Human Torch on a cartoon, and so that's why they allegedly replaced the Human Torch with Herbie the Robot. Of course, that's not the case. That is a false urban legend, but I imagine that Byrne had heard that urban legend, and so that was kind of what inspired him to do this issue. And I have heard a lot of people say that this issue is one of their favorite Fantastic Four issues of all time, and I do not understand how that is the case, because this issue is pretty terrible. Like I said, it is a tie-in with Secret Wars 2, which we had some tie-ins with Secret Wars 2, I think last volume, when Sue Storm was becoming Malice. And I am not a huge fan of what I've read of Secret Wars 2. I think I read one issue of Secret Wars 2, and then I read a couple of the Fantastic Four Secret Wars 2 crossovers, and I wasn't really a huge fan of those either. But this issue has the Beyonder. Basically, he comes to tell Johnny Storm, hey, listen, you need to keep being the Fantastic Four's Human Torch. You don't need to give up being a superhero, because when Johnny Storm finds out that this kid set himself on fire to try and emulate the Human Torch, Johnny is like, okay, I need to stop being the Human Torch. I'm setting a bad example for kids like this, and possibly other kids who are going to set themselves on fire. And then the Beyonder comes in and says, no, you should keep being a superhero. And then Johnny keeps being a superhero. John Byrne has said himself that he really hates this issue because he was forced to use the Beyonder. Jim Shooter said, okay, this is the issue number that you're going to have to do a tie-in with Secret Wars 2, and John Byrne kept saying, please don't make me do a tie-in with Secret Wars 2. Jim Shooter said, yes, you're going to have to do it. Apparently, John Byrne even offered to do a different story that tied in with Secret Wars 2 so that he could save this Human Torch decides to retire story for a later issue. Jim Shooter wouldn't let him do that. There was a big push and pull. John Byrne, of course, is biased because he despises Jim Shooter, so he's going to tell it like Jim Shooter was punching him in the face, when in reality, it probably wasn't that bad. The thing is, even if you take the Beyonder out of the story and you make John Byrne happy and say, look, there's no Beyonder in it, this is still a terrible story, because you've got this kid and he's got a pretty lonely life. His parents are both pretty well off, but they're not really there for him. They're always working, and so he's always home alone. And then he sees some dude, I don't even know what this guy does for a living. He's playing with a toy airplane or a toy helicopter or something, and he had to put some real jet fuel in it, or it was actually a combination of different jet fuels or something something to make this toy airplane thing work. And I don't even know how this guy knows this kid, but then he tells the kid, hey, why don't you go put up that jet fuel for me? Which, wow, really? You're making a little 13-year-old kid do that for you? And I should go ahead and mention, they say that the kid is 13, but he actually looks and acts like he's 8 years old. But anyway, this guy tells the 13-year-old kid to go put up the jet fuel. He says, if you got that on you, you might accidentally turn yourself into another Human Torch. And then we get a silent panel of the kid looking at the jet fuel, and you can pretty much figure out, okay, he's going to set himself on fire. And then Johnny finds out about it, and then he's crying, rightly so, and he's saying, this is partly my fault. Now, obviously, Johnny did not tell this kid to light himself on fire, but Johnny is somewhat responsible. We live in a world today where commercials will say, hey, don't try this at home. And a lot of people will make fun of commercials that say that. People will say, back in my day, we didn't have to be told not to try it at home. We would try it and then we were fine. People would say that. The other day, I was watching a commercial. I think it was when I was watching The Flash. I saw this commercial where this woman is in a car and traffic is stopped, and then she gets out of her car, and then immediately at the bottom of the screen, the commercial says, do not attempt this at home. Don't attempt to get out of your vehicle in a road that might have traffic on it or something like that. We live in a world today where people are better safe than sorry. It's like, okay, we're going to do this commercial. It might be funny, but we better tell people not to try it at home just to cover our butts. I feel like the Human Torch, while he wasn't directly responsible for this kid setting himself on fire, he probably could have gone on the Ellen DeGeneres show or whatever the 1980s equivalent was, and he could have said, now kids, I can set myself on fire, but that's because I've been radiated by gamma radiation, not gamma, cosmic radiation. So you kids, don't set yourselves on fire. Do not set yourselves on fire. Seriously, don't do it. Johnny could have made more of an effort to try and prevent this kind of thing from happening. And I feel like whenever he's kind of whining about how this is his fault, it is kind of sort of indirectly his fault. Now, also, you could blame the idiot kid who is emotionally immature and acts way younger than what he actually is. You could blame the guy who leaves the jet fuel hanging out and tells the kid to go put it up. You could blame the parents who are never there for their kid. There's a whole bunch of people you could blame before you blame the Human Torch, but I don't think that the Human Torch is 100% blameless in this situation. Having said all of that, I think it would have been really cool to have had like a year where the Human Torch actually retires from being a superhero, where this actually affects him and he has to go and kind of gather his thoughts and decide if he wants to keep being a superhero or not. I have a feeling the reason that they didn't do that, one, they probably just didn't want to do that, but two, if they had decided that they might have wanted to have done that, we already have the Thing taking a break from the Fantastic Four, and he's been replaced by She-Hulk. So I have a feeling they would not have wanted to have had Johnny quit being in the Fantastic Four while the Thing is also gone. They would not have wanted to have had two members of the classic team be gone with only Reed and Sue, She-Hulk, and somebody else replacing Johnny. I have a feeling that is a big reason why they didn't want to explore this idea of the Human Torch actually being affected by this, because the way it's played here, as soon as the Beyonder tells Human Torch, listen, the kid was a really big fan of yours. Look, he has a Human Torch poster on his wall. Then Johnny's like, oh, okay, so he liked me. I guess that means it's okay. And then at the end of the issue, we've got this doctor who was the doctor for this kid, and she's telling her boss that if the kid was still around, he would probably call this a happy ending. And I'm over here like, what? The kid is dead. He would not call this a happy ending. I don't see how any of you people are just like, it's okay, the kid's dead, I'll just go back to being the Human Torch. It's really badly handled, and that's part of the reason why I think this would have benefited if we had had Johnny actually be affected by this kid dying. It feels really weird and really awkward that Johnny, for about 2 pages, is like, oh, I'm so sad, this kid died because of me, and then the Beyonder says, hey, you should keep being the Human Torch, and then he's like, okay, I'm going to keep being the Human Torch. It's just a really badly written issue, and I don't think John Byrne being forced to use the Beyonder is what makes it a bad issue. I think it's just a bad issue, period. John Byrne may not think so. Every other person on the planet may think it's good. I think it's a pretty bad issue. And then after that, we get a few issues that, again, they don't really feel like Fantastic Four stories. They feel more like a backdoor pilot for the upcoming series X Factor. We get 1 issue of Fantastic Four and 1 issue of Avengers that are setting up the return of Jean Grey, who by this point everyone thought was dead. And basically these 2 issues are using an idea by Kurt Busiek that Jean Grey was actually still at the bottom of the Jamaica Bay. If you haven't read any of the X-Men issues from the mid-70s to the very early 80s, basically all of the X-Men were in outer space, and then as they're coming back to Earth, Jean Grey pilots the ship, and then she gets really badly radiation poisoned, and then they land in the Jamaica Bay, and then the Phoenix Force creates a duplicate of Jean Grey's body, and then it leaves Jean Grey in suspended animation at the bottom of the bay so that she can recover from her radiation poisoning. And then when the X-Men all come up in the bay, the Phoenix is the one that comes forth, and then it's like, hey, I'm the Phoenix and I'm also Jean Grey, but actually it wasn't Jean Grey at all. It was the Phoenix Force with Jean Grey's memories. And then the Dark Phoenix saga rolls around in early 1980, and then everyone thinks that Jean Grey is dead. And then these two issues roll around where the Avengers and the Fantastic Four find out that Jean Grey is actually alive, and then they're telling her, hey, it's been a really long time since you died. And she's like, what are you talking about? I haven't died. And then they're telling her, oh, okay, well, there was this thing called the Phoenix, and it took your place for a while. And then that leads into X-Factor issue 1, where all of the original 5 X-Men, or the original 4, who are not Jean Grey, they all find out that Jean Grey is alive, and then they form X-Factor investigations where they pretend to hunt down mutants, and they fan the flames of mutant hatred because they are idiots. This, again, does not really feel like a Fantastic Four story. It's a backdoor pilot for the X-Factor series, and if I was in a huge mood to read X-Factor, then this would be great to have. In fact, I have read X-Factor before. I've read almost all of Essential X-Factor Volume 1, and I did read these issues when I was reading that stuff. And these issues, this Avengers issue 263 and Fantastic Four 286, they're very necessary if you're wanting to read the X-Factor series, because Jean Grey comes back to life in these 2 issues. But if you're in a huge Fantastic Four mood, then you probably don't care about the Phoenix that much. I'm a huge X-Men fan, and when I'm in a Fantastic Four mood, I want to read about the Fantastic Four. I don't really care about the Phoenix or how she came back to life. So this whole book basically just feels like it's not really a Fantastic Four book. It's just the Fantastic Four kind of showing up in a couple of stories where they're not really crucial. There's one story here where I feel like it's a Fantastic Four story, and that's the Human Torch story, and even that one isn't very good. So overall, would I recommend John Byrne Visionaries Volume 7? No, I would not. The only reason I would recommend you buy this is if you already have Volumes 1 through 6 and Volume 8, and you're a huge completist and you just need to fill your hole, in which case you've probably already bought this issue, or this volume. But I would not recommend anyone buy this. I don't think that this is very good. Some of the stories are okay. The story where Jean Grey comes back to life, it's okay. The story where the Skrulls are unable to transform, it's alright, but they don't feel like Fantastic Four stories. They feel like stories that the Fantastic Four happen to be involved in. So those are my thoughts on this volume. I hope that you guys had a great time watching this video. I hope that I was able to inform you one way or another whether you should buy this book. And I will see you guys in the future with some other videos. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of your day. Catch you later.